be home soon enough.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Police Oversight Board meeting. It is Thursday, March the 8th, 2018. And I'd like to call us to order. I'd like to start with a Pledge of Allegiance from Chelsea DeVenter. Okay, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, before we also get started, I'd like to mention that Leonard Waits is not here today. He's in Washington, D.C., but we do have him on speakerphone, so he's at our meeting. Anyway, the next is our mission statement, Advancing Constitutional Policing and Accountability for APD and the Albuquerque Community. Do I have approval of the agenda?
I make a motion that we approve the agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, do we have any public comments?
Maria, can you look at that sign-up sheet?
No, I just wanted a copy of the agenda.
No, I just did anybody sign up for? Okay.
Okay, we have no one signed up for public comments. Has everybody had the opportunity to review and approve the minutes?
Mhm. Did you see anything? Okay. So you need a motion.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the next thing we have is the election of the new POB chair. I would like to have Mark Baker, our attorney, address some issues that have come up and how to move forward.
Chair St. John, I'm going to let Matt Jackson speak to some of the options that we have tonight. I wanted to just start off by saying that our overarching advice to the board is that whatever happened last month, there are ways to correct the record, whatever the intent of the board is. And so the overarching consideration tonight is, who does the board want to serve as chair for the next 12 months? And there are procedural steps that we need to take depending on what that ultimately is. And Mr. Jackson has closely analyzed them, and there are a number. We think that one is the optimum one. But I don't think that, I don't want to step into a policy role, but from a legal analysis, there isn't a right or a wrong way to deal with this issue, because there was an effort to fix a mistake, and there was a mistake made by me in the early drafting of the policies and procedures for which I bear full responsibility. But you could tell, I went back through the meeting last month, and you could tell that the overarching goal was, let's fix that issue and not a merits-based who should be the next chair. And so we think that a court ultimately analyzing this issue, if there was ever a challenge to what happens tonight, would also look at the intent of the board. Who through the will of a majority of the board was selected to be the chair for the coming year. And that's what we would encourage the analysis to focus on, and not bogged down in a fight over the language of the ordinance versus the policies and procedures, because there are procedural steps that can be taken that Matt will walk through to address whatever needs to be addressed on those. And so I'll turn the floor over to him, but I think that the advice that you received last month was consistent with what needed to be done to deal with the procedural timing issue. Now that there's been differing views as to what the fallout from that is for this month, we've come up with options that allow the board to continue with its will as to who the chair should be for the next 12 months.
So first, I want to say that as board counsel, it's not our role to substitute our judgment for that of the board. Mark and I have not been appointed to the board. You all have. That's why we present you with options and address the risks that are associated with those options, unless it's clear that there's only one course of action that would comply with the board's obligations under the law. In addition, we're counsel to the whole board, not to individual members, and we therefore must strive not to take the side of one member as against another, which is another reason that we present options to you, and let the board decide it via majority vote. So we recognize that that can be frustrating. You want clear guidance from us, but for board counsel, that has to be balanced against the role and responsibility of what board counsel does. And this is only an issue because we have to, as Mark said, we've got to get the policies and procedures synced up with the ordinance. So the board has three options, under two of which member Waits would be eligible to serve as the chair for the coming year. So the first option is for a board member to move to invalidate last month's election on the grounds that the board as a body did not have the same understanding of what that election meant. Some board members have indicated that they clearly understood that they were voting for Mr. Waits to serve for the coming year. Others have indicated that they thought he would only serve from the February meeting until the election at this meeting. Rather than argue about who was right and about that vote, passing that motion would allow the board to simply clearly express through a vote who the chair should be. Now, the second option would be for a board member to move to deem last month's election to have been held at this meeting, thereby ratifying last month's election. This is similar to the action that the board would take to ratify a past action taken by a board member on behalf of the board without first securing a majority vote. If the board were to choose this course of action, then Mr. Waits would be deemed to have been elected tonight and then would preside again for the coming year. The third option would be that the board can go forth with an election, treating the election at last month's meeting as valid, resulting in Mr. Waits being ineligible to run tonight because he would be succeeding himself under the ordinance. Now, from there, the board has a number of choices. If the sense of the board is that Mr. Waits should preside for the coming year, we can go through the same dance that we did last month, and somebody can accept a nomination on the understanding that they will step aside, and then we go through this again for a third month in a row. Now, we would only recommend this if the board is so uncomfortable with the first two options and how they interact with the language of the ordinance that you believe this is necessary. But otherwise, we believe that so long as the board wants an election in which everyone other than last year's chair is eligible for election, the first of these options is probably going to be the best. Now, each of these approaches carries some risk. If the board chooses an option that results in Mr. Waits serving as chair for the coming year, someone could file a claim alleging that his election was invalid or that some action that he took during the coming year would be invalid. We think that's a manageable risk. The board's role is primarily advisory, and the chair's got limited authority beyond that he or she would have as a board member in the first instance. The court is unlikely to see an effort to fix this failure to synchronize the elections with the ordinance as a substantive rather than a cosmetic problem. In a case decided just this month, our Supreme Court reiterated that it has, and this is quoted, emphasized our policy of avoiding insistence on hyper-technical form and exacting language. The court decried, again, this is a quote, the technical niceties or procedural booby traps New Mexico left behind more than 70 years ago. Now, that case involved a context other than a board election or a board action, but the court was very clear as to how it feels about technical arguments. The risk carried by not permitting Mr. Waits to be elected as chair on the basis of the ordinance language is that it may thwart the intention of the majority of the board. And the risk carried by electing a placeholder chair tonight and having another election in April is that the board will continue to spend time on this election issue, which again is a cosmetic issue, instead of engaging in its substantive work. Now, again, I want to be careful that I'm not substituting my opinion for that of the board, but as we said, we assume that the question will be coming of which of these three would you prefer, and the first seems to be the most sensible option.
Vice Chair St. John, may I speak?
Yes, sir.
I would like to make a motion that we accept the second option, if you could repeat it for us so we can understand clearly what it is, but I think it clearly captures the intent of the board that Leonard Waits would serve as the chair of the board for this next year. So if you could reread that number 2, I think it would avoid all the disagreements and let us move on to some more important work.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Larson, that option would be a motion to deem last month's election to have been held at this meeting and to ratify the results of that election.
I would like to make that motion.
I would like to second that motion.
All in favor?
Is there discussion?
Is there open discussion?
So could you repeat the impact that it may have for us in accepting this option?
Again, there is a risk that someone will bring a complaint challenging an action of the board on the basis that the chair was improperly elected. We believe that's a low risk. We believe a court would not be receptive to that argument, but it is a risk.
Is there any way that we can mitigate that in the way that we vote and the way that we present our opinion?
Vice Chair St. John, Member Cruz, I think that the explanation that's been laid out, and if you're clear on the vote that this is the will of the board for the person to serve as chair for the coming year, is the best mitigation for that issue, because we are dealing with a substantive rather than a technical issue here, and I think a court's going to defer to the will of the board.
Very good, thank you.
Any more discussion? Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed.
Any opposed? No, no opposition here. So this is passed.
Thank you for your work, gentlemen, on that.
Oh, once again, thank you for all this research you've done, and we look forward to moving on in the future to see if there's any changes we need to do.
Vice Chair St. John, members of the board, we'll be fixing the policies to align with the ordinance. And again, I apologize, that was my mistake in drafting. It was a confusion over when the election would happen versus when people would take office, and I take full responsibility for that. With your permission, I came tonight, I'm not charging you guys for my time here tonight. I wanted to make sure you had everyone who'd looked at the issue present. But with your permission, I'll excuse myself, and Mr. Jackson will remain for the rest of the board's business, or if that's a...
No, that's what, you're welcome to
Okay.
excuse yourself.
All right.
Once again, thank you. for
Thank you all
helping
very
us.
much.
Vice Chair St. John, I'd like to make a comment before you leave, Mr.
Sure.
Baker. While I agree that the Supreme Court, I think they were talking about a 70-year-old statute in the thing you mentioned, but it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that we don't have this goat rope again. Am I clear in understanding that the way we will write this is that we will have the elections in March as it is stated in the statute? Because we're holding the police department responsible for following their ordinances and statutes. And for us to try to minimize it as something that's trivial because we just haven't done it right and we can fix it, kind of throws a wet rag on what we're saying to other people. So I would like assurance that we are going to correct this. So next year we will have this in March and everything will be done without having all of these discussions.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Larson, by the next meeting, we will have a proposal for you to amend the ordinances, the policies and procedures, to directly tie to the ordinance and resolve this so that the election will be next March.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Good night.
Okay, next we have on our agenda is dinner breaks.
I motion to skip dinner breaks.
Okay, well, we need to open it for discussion.
Well, that's the way you open
Okay,
it.
let's discuss it.
To make a motion.
Okay, you make a
So
motion?
I second your motion.
I have a comment on the earlier issue, and that is, we have not held the election for vice chair.
Sir, I get to, since I
I-
didn't
is-
vote, you have to
is that-
explain to Mark the legal why I can stay on.
Is this, I mean, is this the appropriate, I guess what I'm asking is, when's the appropriate time to deal with that? And has that been, I don't see that, is that on the agenda?
No, but
So-
go ahead, Mark.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Cass, it is not listed on the agenda, which is a potential issue. However, it is true that Vice Chair St. John was elected to fill out the remaining term of the former Vice Chair, Carlotta Garcia, and it would if we're going to clean this up, it's probably appropriate to go ahead and have an election for Vice Chair at this point.
Okay, well, this is, Ken,
Why is it, does it need to be on the agenda? Is it not being on the agenda a problem? Because I didn't think we could vote on things that weren't on the agenda.
Can we hold it under other business?
No, you have to, it has to be, since it's a chair and vice chair. Is it possible we'll just put it on next month's agenda? Or, well,
But that does exactly what Mr.
That's
Larson
right.
doesn't want to have happen.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Fine, Member Galloway, the board is a little bit between a rock and a hard place here. The ordinance, and again, I'll read the provision regarding the elections, says that the POB shall elect one of its members as the chairperson and one as vice chairperson, who shall each hold office for 1 year and until their successors are elected. No officer shall be eligible to immediately succeed himself or herself in the same office. Officers shall be elected in the month of March of each calendar year or upon vacancy of an office to fill the remaining term. So upon vacancy of an office to fill the remaining term is how the Vice Chair St. John was elected to the office. And it is the month of March, but the Open Meetings Act requires that business be noticed before a body can act on it. So the choice is between a violation of the ordinance and a violation of the Open Meetings Act. Again, this is a difficult situation.
Can we just defer it to next month on purpose?
That would be my recommendation. As I was discussing last month, the ordinance, as the law of the city of Albuquerque, controls over the policies and procedures which govern the board by the board's adoption. Similarly, the laws of the state of New Mexico will supersede the Albuquerque ordinances when they come into conflict.
It is precisely, is it okay if I talk? It's precisely this that I think we look to our attorneys for, to make sure we don't make these kinds of mistakes. And here we are making it again. And that's frustrating to me, and it would be to me if I was you.
So, yeah.
So what are our choices at this meeting right now?
Your options here would be to hold an election for vice chair or to defer the election for vice chair to next month. Or it is possible to read the ordinance to say that the vice chair shall hold office for 1 year and until the successor is elected. That may be a strained reading, given that the ordinance also contemplates the filling of a midterm vacancy. So the risks of each of these are, for that last option, to to continue in office may violate the language of the ordinance.
Okay, because that's where it kind of gets confusing when you finish somebody's term. And I saw the argument with Commissioner Stebbins. When she got to Michelle Grisham's position, she was able to run 2 terms because she hadn't fulfilled the first one. And that's why I just kind of want this explained to me. So when we come in, because people come and go, and we fulfill their position, when does it end?
Chair St. John, the analogy that you raise is an interesting one. As I think you're all aware, I'm not an Albuquerque resident, so.
All right.
But there was a similar situation at the state level when Brad Winter took over as the Secretary of State when Secretary of State Duran had to step down. And I am not familiar with the council ordinance, but at least as to the at the state level, you serve 2 consecutive terms, and the question is are those full terms? Here, the language is a little bit different. It talks about not succeeding. I can see that going either way, but that is the risk. The danger and what I would caution against, should the board choose this approach, is that if the board decides that Vice Chair St. John should continue in that role, that also run until March of 2019. Otherwise, you run into a situation where if there's a vacancy, then you have to keep track of where that vacancy is, and you'll have elections multiple times a year.
So the question then, to be clear, is that if she's fulfilling someone else's term, should that partial term be held against her in running again for office?
Vice Chair St. John, Member Fine, that is the question.
So I would go back to the fact that when we asked her to do that, we did not know that, okay? So we did not assume that serving a partial term would serve as an obstacle to you serving a full term or getting elected again. We didn't make that clear when we asked her to do this. So I would be in favor of us ignoring this partial term and letting whoever wants to run as vice chair and have an election.
Vice Chair St. John and Member Fine, I had presented some options and I was sort of running back through the risks of them. But I'm going to go ahead and jump over that middle option and go back to the first option, which would be, what are the risks of holding an election for vice chair tonight? The risks of that are that it would violate the Open Meetings Act. The ordinance does not provide a cause of action for violating it. It's unclear that a claimant would be able to succeed under that. The Open Meetings Act does. Somebody can go to court and have an action declared invalid because it wasn't properly noticed on the agenda, and that would be.
But it's 2 separate questions. Whether or not a partial term, fulfilling a partial term for somebody else, should count against you in terms of your willingness or your ability to run for office later after that partial term is complete, is a separate question from whether or not we should vote tonight on the position of vice chair. So if we take them separately, could we vote on whether or not this body believes a partial term should count against in this case, or in any case going forward? And the second vote would be that could we delay this, again, defaulting to and agreeing with the disappointment by Member Larson that we're even in this position in terms of voting tonight, because it should have been on the agenda tonight. And we knew it was coming up, and yet it still isn't on the agenda. So to me, they're 2 different questions. One does the previous partial term make it so that, that a member of the board who serves that partial term can't run again in the succeeding year? And then the second question is how to deal with an election this evening.
Vice Chair St. John and Member Fine, what I was coming to is that because it would likely present an Open Meetings Act violation to have an election tonight, it may be better to defer consideration of not only the election, but of the partial term question until such time as it's material, which would be next month. That would give us an opportunity to look into the question and so that we can better advise you on it.
Yes, ma'am.
I was, Vice Chair St. John, I was going to suggest, I think what you did come around to just now, which is that why don't we place this on the agenda next month? That way we haven't violated the Open Meetings Act. The further we discuss this issue, we're just expanding upon our current violation of the Open Meetings Act. So I think that we should put it on the agenda for next month, and we should ask our council to make clear, maybe in a document, what our options for vice chair are, just much like he did today with the issue concerning the current chair. That way we can have an easier discussion about what's available next time and we're not violating the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, you want to
Second that motion.
I'd like to move that we delay this election, and we put it on the agenda for next month. And in the meantime, get legal counsel to give us our options at that time.
Second that.
I disagree with that because if the option comes back that we cannot go back and count that time, or that for that person who picked up that part of that term, then we have a difference in election between the chair and the vice chair. I would say that we actually have a special meeting again this month to just make an election and have it live and go on from there. Very quick meeting. So we're all on the same page and we have the chair and the vice chair at the same time.
Well, I agree with you that whatever we do, it has to be synced. The chair and vice chair has to be synced. The question is, how do we get there? And we could have gotten there tonight if it was on the agenda. So, ma'am, it's your motion, is it not?
I'm not clear on whose motion it was. It sounded like Bill made it for
No,
me.
I think it was yours. And then
Okay. I think those are both good ideas. I mean, I think that what Eric is suggesting makes it clean so that, hopefully when we come around to elections again in March, we're doing both at the same time. Is that necessary? No, probably not. And could it happen that one of the chairs gets vacated in between anyways, and it wouldn't be clean again? We would have kind of a similar issue. That could happen. So I don't think that it's necessary, but if the board did want to do what Eric's suggesting, I think that could be a good idea too.
If I can speak. I think that the idea that partial term served does not count is contrary to the way almost all elections are held. Terms are filled all the time in public office, and it's filled for the term until the next election. There are special elections, in fact, that occur sooner than the end of the term might have been, but the term that's filled the person who fills the term never exceeds the length of the term that they're filling. I don't believe that's, I don't believe that happens very often at all. So I think that's a remote possibility, and I think the ordinance is clear on holding the elections in March. So I think the solution of delaying the election because it wasn't on the agenda is something we're done with, we need to do, but to put it back on the regular March schedule seems very straightforward and in accordance with the ordinance. So I think the original motion to delay the election to the next meeting, elect a vice chair, and go on, and then recognize that we're electing a vice chair that's going to serve out a term until March 2019 election.
And I'd like to speak to Eric's point the fact that we have an election next month doesn't mean that and it's because we would violate the Open Meetings Act this time. It doesn't mean that we put this out of sync. So if we have an election next time, it is to serve between next time and March of 2019. Do you understand? So I think that solves your problem and we don't violate the Open Meetings Act.
Okay.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Cruz, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness on this, and I agree with you 100%. Here we are again, already. We just had a conversation about getting things fixed, and we're already trying to jockey things around. And I don't even know what the motion is right now. And I think the statute is extremely clear that you will not be able to succeed yourself. You will fill out the remainder of that term. It's unfortunate, but that's what it says, and I don't want us to get bogged down in that. But what I think we ought to do is what Member Cruz says is, can you guys get us a decision on that? And I don't mean a decision on what the law says, not on how we can avoid it again. And then we have a special meeting. And we have a very quick special meeting with one agenda item, and that is we elect a vice president and stop all this stuff. I mean, we say, okay, well, we'll put it off for next month. We vote in April. So then we say, oh, but it'll be up in March. And by the way, we had an election for your position, Chair Fine, in January. And so, I mean, we're all over the place here, and so we've got to get back on track and stop this. We've been spending almost 40 minutes now talking about how in the hell we're supposed to do our business.
All because it wasn't on the agenda tonight.
No, not all because it was not on the agenda tonight. It's because it was all messed up for a long time. So if whoever made the motion would withdraw the motion and allow Member Cruz to make a motion, I think we could all agree to it.
I'll withdraw my motion.
And how much notice do we have to provide?
3 days.
3 days for the Open Meetings Act? Okay.
Okay, I can second Eric's motion in lieu of the other motion that has been withdrawn.
Okay. All in favor?
Is there
I've
further
moved for the
discussion?
question.
I think, is there any further discussion?
So to restate that the motion is that we will have a special election when, next week, when will we be able to have this room, or when do we need to be here? Is there availability for this room on the same time, same day next week?
We'll have to check, right?
Vice Chair St. John and Member Cruz, I'll have to pull up the City Council Chambers roster and try and get you a date. And I'll see if that's available.
Would it be possible to do
currently.
that before the end of this meeting, so we can announce that?
I will try.
Thank you. So the motion is that we will have a special meeting sometime this month, before the end of the month in March, for the vice chair position.
And the motion has been seconded.
Thank you.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any opposed?
Dinner breaks.
I move that we vacate the dinner break agenda item.
I second that.
Okay, anyone for discussion?
As I understand it, what we're discussing is whether to have dinner breaks, not whether to take a dinner break.
Right,
And so
I'm voting that we vacate this dinner break so we can move on to the rest of our agenda.
Yeah. And
I move to vacate this dinner break.
item on the agenda.
Not dinner breaks in their entirety.
we're not talking about having a dinner break. We're talking about discussing whether we want to have dinner
Oh,
breaks.
is that what's
If that's what
intended
it
to be
is,
on the
yes,
agenda?
yeah.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Vice Chair St. John?
Yes.
Once again, what are we talking about now?
Apparently, we're having a discussion whether to continue having dinner breaks.
In what capacity, though? Through what period of time? Today, or through in perpetuity of our
In
meetings?
perpetuity, I think.
Okay, no.
That was
I
my
think the
confusion.
discussion, the reason for this is because several of us think that taking dinner breaks on the public's time is impolite at best. We also have the issue of people that work full-time, that for whom getting here at 5 o'clock is a challenge anyway. So it seems to me that if we wanted to have food here, the most considerate thing we could do is to have it here at 5 o'clock when we get here. And then we could not break up the meeting. start the meeting at 5:30, give everybody who works full-time a chance to get here, give the public a chance to get here, and that not disrupt our meeting for a dinner break.
So we're not eliminating dinner breaks, we're just moving them to the beginning of the meeting.
Correct.
I would rather just get rid of them altogether
Okay.
and just make this time shorter.
Okay.
It's already long, you know, this
Yeah,
is a long
especially
night.
when we talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Vice Chair St. John?
Okay, so,
I think that, I agree with moving the meeting to 5:30, but I don't agree with us coming here and having a dinner break paid for by the citizens. And plus, I think by making it at 5:30, it gives those that are working a chance to get here by 5:30. And also those that might have childcare issues or something and like to get home, they can get home a little earlier. So I would suggest that we just move the meetings to 5:30 and completely cancel any future dinner breaks. Unless it's supposedly requirement, and I mean, we really feel we need one, and we can specifically define that at a meeting before it.
Vice Chair St. John?
yes.
I would like to hear from, I believe Chantal and Eric are the two people who have regular
And
8
Johnny,
to
but
5s.
he's not here. Yeah.
Oh, I'm curious if they think moving the meeting to 5:30 would be helpful. We shouldn't do something for them if it's not useful for them.
I don't know, I know that Johnny and his wife, they have one vehicle, and she comes from someplace and picks them up, and I'm not sure how
And
the
he has
time.
Sometimes the ones that
He
are
has
here.
to take time off work to be here at 5 o'clock. He's mentioned that a few times. It makes me no difference whether the meeting's at 5 or 5:30. My end game is to get home earlier, not get here later,
Okay.
so.
And what about for Eric?
In terms of starting the meeting later, that would be helpful. Is it necessary? No. I still plan out my schedule to get here at 5. However, I think we should keep dinner breaks on the agenda but make them optional, because I think there's something to be said in meeting you all and talking to you all, because I only see you once a month, and socializing and at least getting up to speed on what I should be aware of in terms of this POB is important. So I believe not taking them out entirely is a bad thing to do, but keeping them optional, if we need to meet up, then that's acceptable.
Vice Chair St. John, I would caution that that is exactly what my worry was before I was on this board and I was sitting out in the audience, is that you would go back into this meeting and discuss what's going on with the POB, which is in violation of the Open Meetings Act, and then come back in here and move forward. Now, the one meeting, the dinner break I was attending, I tried to pay attention to that, and I didn't hear people discussing what was going on. But as related by Member Cruz now, that's exactly what he wanted to do. And so I caution us greatly that we don't go back and socialize and find out what's going on with the POB, because then we violate the open meetings law.
And I can tell you that in 3 years that I've served on this, we have never discussed anything. We've caught up with each other, but not discussed anything that has to do with anything.
By POB, I meant the members of the POB.
Yeah,
I want to
just
know what's going on
catching
in
up
your
with
lives
people.
and see you,
Vi-
rather than just be a face that I see once a month. I'd like a little bit more time to
Vice
chat
Chair
on
St. John,
formality.
I really don't like this combination of ideas of both starting the meeting later and still keeping a dinner break. I mean, we'll be here until 10. That's even more disrespectful to the public, because the members of the public who have to be here or want to be here want to get home earlier. And that was actually the reason I think this ended up on the agenda, I believe, was because Board Member Galloway wants to get home earlier because she has young children at home. So those two things, we can't do both of those two things. I strenuously object to both of those things. I motion that we keep the meeting beginning at 5 and that we remove dinner breaks.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do I have a second?
Second?
Yeah.
Open for discussion? All in favor, say aye.
I,
Aye.
Opposed?
Now who opposes?
Was that Mr.
You have
Waite
to-
saying
Yeah,
aye?
yes,
yes, that
that's
was
Mr.
Mr.
Waits on the
Waite
phone.
saying aye.
Hello, Leonard?
Hello. Let me just say this. I agree. I know we've already voted, but let me just say that. My plan is to start the meeting at 5 and move the agenda as fast, not as fast as we can, but, consistent with me, have that done and be out of there at least by 7. That's my plan.
Okay.
Okay,
And
thank-
Vice Chair St. John, I would appreciate if you would ask for the opposition. That way
Okay.
we know if we,
Alright.
yeah,
And make sure every voice is heard.
make sure we have an actual vote in favor, a majority vote.
Okay, next on our agenda, we have our consent agenda cases, our administratively closed cases.
The, Leonard, are you prepared to do this? You want me to do it?
Would you do it? I'm not prepared.
Okay.
For anything.
When we met last, we went over all of these cases. And the administratively closed cases are cases in which either the district is wrong, they're making a complaint about a police officer who actually works for BCSO. We've hit an impasse in terms of what we can discover, and we've mediated the problem with the complainant and the police department. So that's the kind of thing that makes up administratively closed cases, and it does every month. I move that we accept the administratively closed cases unless anybody here on the board wants to pull one out to discuss it. I need a second.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Any discussion? There being none, call the question. All those in favor?
I'm in favor.
Aye. Opposed, same sign?
Opposed? Okay.
Okay. Cases investigated. We reviewed all of these cases and were in agreement with Director Harness and each other. We felt like the recommendations made by the staff were as they should be, and that they were a complete investigation. So I make a motion that we accept the cases investigated as presented, unless anybody on the board wants to pull one out to discuss it. I need a second.
Okay, do you have a second?
I'll second that.
A second.
Do you have anything you want to say, sir?
Vice Chair St. John, I'd like to get on the record here that I am not voting on any of these cases because I'm not on SharePoint. I don't have access to that data. And so I'm abstaining from voting. And it is something that ties into what has been brought up before, that for new members, we need to have some sort of a process in place so we don't get sort of dragged along where we get Power DMS and then we get evidence.com and then we get emails, but we don't seem to get SharePoint and member
SafeLink.
SafeLink. So
That
and-
should be resolved.
And we have specifically asked Director Harness to get these things done, and I know he has contacted people, but it's still not done, and so I'm abstaining from any vote on any of the cases.
Is there anybody else who is not currently able to access any one of the databases that are the information sources?
Vice Chair St. John, I also don't have access to all of the databases. I've been provided Power DMS. I still don't have my credentials. So I similarly will abstain, and I would like to ask the case review committee, just making a comment here, if and when we have new members, if you can do us the favor of maybe sending us an email, letting us know how many cases are pending that we're currently looking at, because I have no clue what my responsibility is right now as to what cases I need to review for this board.
There's an easy fix for that, and that would be that the agenda for the case review committee lists all the cases that we have to review. And that should go out to everybody on the board so that you know what cases we're reviewing, and you can look at those.
Have you met within the last month?
Yeah, oh, yes. Yes, we've met twice.
I'm sorry, historically, that's not been the case, that we've not been getting each subcommittee's agenda items. So Director Harness and I have spoken about that, and I think that that is being fixed so that we no longer have that issue. But I still think it would be prudent to do an audit of each of the board members to find out what we're missing, just like pick a person, pick a day, and give us phone calls, figure out where we are. Send out a survey monkey, something.
Well, and if you had one of the things we've learned over time is that SharePoint, which you don't have access to, is the place that lists this month's cases that are going to come to the board. And so you would have that list with or without the agenda if you had access to SharePoint. I didn't realize that you all didn't have that. Mr. Larson told me the other day. So that's just not okay. We need to fix that yesterday. Chelsea, do you have access to SharePoint?
I do, and that's how I know what cases we're actually reviewing. But,
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so we need to fix that right now.
And Vice Chair St. John, who is the chair of the case review committee?
I am now.
Okay.
We'll
And
get
so,
together, okay.
okay, and so in the last month, I haven't received any of those agendas, so.
We haven't done it before now.
never done it
It's
before.
just your question
Okay.
that makes it
Okay,
clear.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Fine, the problem with getting the agenda 3 days before you have your meeting is it gives us no time to really
Correct.
go review the cases in a
Well,
meaningful way. So
right.
the fix will be the SharePoint, and we will be able to participate and will. Thank you.
And there are still some things that are not correct, and it's still a hunt and peck situation, because some of the cert cases are listed in a different system, SafeLink. And so when you look at what's going to be presented to the board, that information on the cert cases is not there. So that's something we've asked for the staff to fix, so that everything we're reviewing is on the SharePoint list for the March PLB meeting. That's what it would be listed under.
Thank you.
But you're absolutely right. Thank you for bringing that up. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
I believe this is a matter handled by the chair, is that right?
Yes.
Excuse me?
Motions and calls for vote are handled by the chair?
Oh, I'm so
that's
sorry.
okay.
I thought I was part of
Well, I thought, okay.
this committee. I was presenting the,
No, she's the chair from the committee. You
I'm,
can do the motion.
well, you could.
Okay, so, do I
He
have
just
a
asked me to do it,
motion?
that's all.
Okay. Did you make a motion to?
I did, but,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, and do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? Say
Aye.
Okay, we have no non-concurrence cases. And the next we have serious use of force.
And this is the ones that we talked about last month.
Uh-huh.
So this is the ones where we had to go and see the Garrity materials.
So you wanted to go over there?
Well,
Okay.
do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, you can keep on going.
Okay, I need to see by a show of hands who's gone to see the Garrity materials on this. Jim, you have on these two cases, you've gone to see the Garrity materials on the I cases 10A,
But I have seen, yeah, I did see.
the Garrity materials. So we have four.
Right.
You went with Bill last time, you said.
Which, I'm sorry, I apologize, which?
We reviewed two of these cases. I believe it was, I can't tell you which two of these three listed here.
It's the officer-involved shooting cases. One was Golson, and the other one was, I can't remember the name.
These two.
Oh,
The others are
Yeah,
proposed for.
yeah, yes, okay.
That-
Yes, we reviewed the,
okay, so I'm just trying to see how many people have reviewed it. Leonard, did you review the Garrity materials?
No, I didn't.
So we still don't have a majority of the board that have seen it. We have four. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So we have to table this again because we don't have enough people. I don't know that anybody's here from the department. Oh, there's Deputy Chief Garcia. We'll find out whether or not those hours have been changed in terms of access.
Vice Chair St. John?
Yes.
I can't vote on it anyway, so I wouldn't count, but is there, I'm not recalling a requirement that said there had to be a certain number of people that had reviewed the Garrity material before the board could vote on
We
something.
voted on it last time. We said,
I think we just can't vote to go along with what Director Harness's findings and the internal affairs findings were, or not, whether or not their findings were right, or if we want to go back and make other recommendations.
We
Chair,
discussed this last.
Vice Chair St. John, could we ask Director Harness to clarify the issue here as to what we could proceed with and what we can't?
Vice Chair St. John, Member Dr. Cass. This was tabled last month so that a majority of the board could review the Garrity materials so that they could thoughtfully look at the findings and decide whether or not they want to accept those findings or come to a different conclusion. So as I see it, it looks as though
We have 4.
they're Dr. Cass, Member Galloway, Member Fine, Member Larson, and Member St. John have reviewed the case materials.
No, I didn't go.
I thought you
I
had,
have reviewed the cases, but I didn't go and,
The Garrity materials.
okay, I thought you had reviewed it last month and you were the only one.
No, I didn't, I hadn't gone at the last,
No, I thought Vice Chair St. John was the only one who had reviewed the Garrity materials for last
no.
month. Okay, well,
and we have to table it again. According to what we did last month, if my memory serves me, we said a majority of the board has to go. And we were also asked Deputy Chief Garcia if he would check and see if nights and weekends would be made available. That's my recollection of what we decided last month. Without a majority of the board, that being 5, we can't vote on this because we don't have 5 people who have reviewed the Garrity materials. Tell me if I'm missing something, guys.
I think the only thing that we're missing is that it was pretty clear as we went across giving our opinions last month that the case review committee would all be required to review those materials.
Unfortunately, I'm the only one on the case review committee that went.
Yeah.
Vice Chair St. John, so I believe that we have a motion to table this. And then, is there a I make the motion that we table it.
Okay, do you have a second?
Second.
Okay. Have any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
And Vice Chair St. John,
Yeah.
this is again, something that I would have been able to do, but I have zero idea of what cases are on the
Yeah, we
POB's desk at
understand
this
that.
point.
We'll get that straightened out.
Okay, so this isn't because I
Right, we understand.
don't want to do this. I just need to be provided with the tools.
Okay,
And
we'll
and
get
that presents a good thing, Mr. Harness. If on the list of things that are for the following board meeting on SharePoint, it should list what Garrity material cases there are that we should go and check out. Because this information is all over the place and it needs to be in one place.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Fine, this was on the agenda last month, and it's in the
No, I know that.
and it's in the minutes. So
I know that.
I'm not sure exactly what more notice you would require.
I'm saying that in SharePoint, if we looked at SharePoint right now, the things that were going to be reviewed for this month's meeting does not include the Garrity material case numbers, nor does it include the cert case numbers.
Vice Chair St. John and Board Member Fine, I disagree. It is there. These cases are there. These
Cases are there, not that we have
The
to
case
review.
numbers are there. The cases are there. They're in SharePoint. These particular 2 cases have been on SharePoint for a couple of months. These were not even shared with SafeLink. These were on SharePoint. They've been there.
And the Garrity materials are there too?
No, the Garrity materials have to be viewed at APD. That's by ordinance.
That's my point. That's my point. The fact that we have to review the Garrity materials is not on the list of things of the to-do list on that SharePoint. That's my point. So if you're new coming into this and you don't know those cases, you review the cases, that isn't enough. You have to know that you have to go and see the Garrity materials. And that isn't on the list.
Member
that-
Fine,
that
this was
would've-
voted on last.
I think that would have been a valid argument last month. I don't think it's a valid argument this month.
I'm just saying it's not there to find. You'll see, once you have access to SharePoint, that it's, you still have to hunt and peck and find stuff and remember what it is you're supposed to go look at. And I think that's not enough.
And hopefully that information will be provided to us as we receive in the agendas for the case review committees as well. If we are more open with that, I think that will be beneficial and will solve some of these problems.
Okay?
Vice Chair St. John, I'm sorry to be commenting on all of this, but I just want to tell you that as a new board member, I'm pretty darned embarrassed that this board is supposed to be reviewing these. And I understand Member Fine's question about I think I understand it, but with respect to the specific two cases, that was been on there for a long time. And Chair Waits, I would urge you to take this up as a personal mission during your chairship to see to it that the board members are reviewing the cases. And then I would ask Director Harness, if it is appropriate, could you provide us with, do you have access to who has viewed Garrity materials and who has not?
Vice Chair St. John, Member Larson, I do not unless I ask APD to have a sign-up roster, and then you can sign the roster when you go review the materials.
Okay, I don't think we should go to that extreme, but I think we ought to make a commitment here that we don't fail to do our duty, because that's exactly what we have recently done. Thank you.
Okay.
So you have a motion, sir, on the floor. Did it pass already?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. And Director Harness does these cert cases.
Okay. Director Harness, now we have our cert cases.
Vice Chair St. John, fellow board members, C-1662. Officers were dispatched to a residential burglary at 10714 Benavides Avenue. Upon arrival, officers found a subject fleeing from the scene. Officers gave foot chase. The foot chase went into a schoolyard. At the schoolyard, the officer used his electronic control weapon to subdue the subject and take him into custody. This case was reviewed by the Force Review Board, and the use of force was found to be in policy by unanimous vote. I stand for questions.
Okay, do I have a motion to accept the findings?
I so move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Director Harness, what was your conclusion?
Vice Chair St. John and Member Larson, I'm a voting member of the Force Review Board, and I concluded that the use of force was within policy.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Any opposed? Okay,
Would you announce the result, please?
okay, it passes? Okay.
Unanimously.
Unanimously?
Vice Chair St. John, fellow board members, 2017-10. On March 8th of 2017, the Critical Incident Review Team was notified of a canine apprehension of a subject at 10408 LaGrange Park. Members of the canine unit responded to assist. Officers responded to a car break-in, a foot chase ensued where they lost the subject. They set up a perimeter. The police service dog was used to conduct a yard search, and the subject was apprehended by the officer's police service dog. This incident was before the Force Review Board. The Force Review Board voted unanimously that the use of force was within policy. And I concurred.
I make a
Separate
motion that
questions?
we accept the cert case findings as presented.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
It passes unanimously.
Vice Chair St. John, fellow board members, C-17-12, on March 18th, 2017, the Critical Incident Review Team was notified of a canine apprehension. Officers were dispatched to 1801 Dakota Street Northeast in reference to a residential burglary. Upon arrival, 3 subjects fled. A perimeter was set up and a police dog was used to conduct a yard search, in which one of the subjects was apprehended by the canine. This case came before the Force Review Board, and the use of force was found to be within policy unanimously, and I concur.
Okay, do I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Open for discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
Vice Chair St. John, fellow board members, C-17-14, on March 29th, 2017, the Critical Incident Review Team was notified of a canine apprehension of a male. Officers were dispatched to Smith's Grocery Store located at 6001 North Lomas regarding an aggravated assault. The caller stated that a gentleman was armed with a machete and threatening customers, as well as the security guard. The subject fled. Officers set up a perimeter and utilized the police service dog to locate the subject in the backyard of 1009 Arizona Northeast. The subject was apprehended by the police service dog. The Force Review Board voted that this use of force was within policy unanimously, and I concur.
Okay, do I have a motion to accept these findings?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Open for discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
C-2017-22, Mr. Stephen Halessa was observed by officers of Albuquerque Police Department walking in the middle of the street, punching the air and talking out loud to himself. He was then observed being denied entrance into a local business. The subject was placed under arrest and transported to the detention facility. At the detention facility, the subject got up and bull rushed the officer, striking him with his head. The officer used force to decentralize the person down to the floor and then get him back up and then cuffed to the bench. Because the subject was handcuffed, this was deemed to be a serious use of force under the policy. This was before the Force Review Board. The Force Review Board voted that the use of force was within policy unanimously, and I concurred.
Okay, do I have a motion to accept these findings?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
This is passed unanimously.
Vice Chair St. John, fellow board members, C-17-31. Officers were dispatched to 5200 Manal Boulevard, Northeast, with the intention of making contact with someone inside the store. Upon the officer's arrival, a non-involved individual came up to the officer and attacked the officer, punching him to the face and knocking him to the ground. The officer, dazed, called for backup. Backup officer arrived. This individual then squared up, uh, making boxing motions and looking like, if you watch the video, he looks like he's doing a Muhammad Ali butterfly. The officer in front of him used his electronic control weapon to subdue the subject and take him into custody. He did cycle it 3 times in order to get the individual cuffed. Therefore, it was a serious use of force. This came before the Force Review Board and was found to be within policy by unanimous vote, and I concur.
Okay, do I have a motion to accept these findings?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Open for discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is therefore passed unanimously. Next, we have the review of the Garrity material.
Vice Chair St. John, these 3 cases, I-17115, I-5017, and I-2417, are already for the board's review. It appears that the documents were uploaded to evidence.com along with the videos. So all of these case materials are on the evidence.com links that you've received over the last 10 days or so. However, the Garrity materials, you need to vote to have those set aside and ready for you at APD.
I make a motion that we ask APD to set aside a review times for the review of Garrity materials for listed under item 11 on the agenda.
Okay, do I have a second?
A second.
Any discussion? All-
I presume that this is a special time for people who can't make it during regular hours. I mean, I would just like clarification that it's possible to review during normal hours with some advance notice to APD. So I think that's probably a question for Commander Garcia.
Vice Chair St. John and Dr. Cass, yes, you can schedule an appointment with us 24 hours in advance, anytime in between the hours of 7:30 and 4:30. Also, we can set aside some additional time, maybe twice a month, that you can come up to maybe 6 or 7 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair St. John?
Yes.
And Director Harness. These case numbers appear to be CPOA case numbers, is that correct?
Vice Chair St. John, Member Van Deventer, no, these are internal affairs case numbers.
Okay. So when I get to APD to review these Garrity materials, they will be able to identify them using these case numbers, is that correct? Okay.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Van Deventer, that's correct.
Okay, and is that likewise for, in my experience as a public defender, evidence.com was kind of chaotic in the way things rolled in, and it was very difficult to identify what belonged to what and what came from where. Will I be able to identify the videos and documents using these internal affairs case numbers?
Vice Chair St. John and Member Van Deventer, yes, you will be, but it won't be readily recognizable from the menu. You'll have to actually open the document to see how they, to see the internal case number so you can relate the two.
Okay, if I have further questions, I'll follow up with you on that. Thank you.
Just a point of information, the way you get to review the Garrity materials is that you call internal affairs. I called the other day for Commander Garcia and made a time with her. So that's, getting her phone number is the way to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's see. Where are we? Okay, where are we?
We're at number 12.
Okay. Okay, now we have reports from the subcommittees, from the Outreach Committee. Johnny Army, who has not here, but that's going to be the report for us.
I am in theory, aren't I? So the outreach subcommittee met on Tuesday, February 22nd at the Plaza del Sol building. We had a guest with us for public comment, a Miss Rogers, who came. She's part of the Neighborhood Alliance on Crime and was more curious to find out how her organization, the organization that she's a part of, and the CPOA and the POB might be working either together so as not to duplicate efforts, or whether their organization should continue pursuing the efforts and the agenda that they have, which she ultimately left feeling as though her committee was needed as well. So she came. We spent the majority of our evening on the 22nd, and then also at our meeting in January, discussing a mission statement for that subcommittee, and we ended up with a mission statement of outreach will promote the mission of the POB and be the bridge for communication with the community. So we're thankful to have that finalized. We had, as part of our discussion at the recommendation of Director Harness, the idea of exploring hosting events for the POB so that we can be out in the community raising awareness. And I believe that Vice Chair St. John recommended we have 4 events a year that we would in some way or another participate in. I think 3 of those, correct me if I'm wrong, we were just going to participate in somebody else's event, and then we would host one of our own. So we're talking about goals and action items for that at our upcoming meeting in March. We scheduled out for the remainder of 2018, the 4th Tuesday of every month at 5:30. The only notable exception to that will be December 25th. As much as I love my committee members, I don't plan to spend Christmas with them. Our next meeting will be held Tuesday, March 27th at 5:30 p.m. at the Plaza del Sol building.
Okay, thank you very much. You're welcome. Okay, next we have the Policy and Procedure Review Subcommittee.
I can't remember. We've met twice since the last meeting, and essentially we've made progress on several issues. First of all, there was some discussion in the committee, and I think this has been resolved to create a working process that follows the Open Meetings Act and follows all the rules, but dispenses with the formality of meeting and approving agenda items that have already been submitted in advance. We're going to continue to, encourage public comment and record the meetings. We're looking to make them just more streamlined and make the minutes that we record more concise. And so essentially this was done by agreement within the committee, and these are the rules that are the guidelines that we're going to use to conduct our meetings. And if we're reporting this, and we'll, if it later turns out get in trouble, we'll beg for forgiveness. But I don't think that there's anything here that is intended to do anything other than streamline the meeting while maintaining complete openness to the public. So that's item 1. Item 2 is that we've also worked on developing a policy recommendation process or a policy review process, and it's closely tied to the policy development process that's ongoing at APD. And so there's been significant exchange with Attorney Schmiel, APD, who's representing APD in this process of process development. And I've passed out 2 sheets. One is one's a timeline which shows how APD's process plays out, and I think it's worth just a quick review of what it is. But at the present, APD is proposing that 2 weeks before an OPA meeting, that they send out a policy packet which has been prepared by the subject matter experts at APD. And then that is made available to the public and including given to the POB or to the point of contact for the POB. Then at the open meeting, the public will be prepared to, or will be invited to participate, and they're thinking of changing the schedule for OPA meetings to a more amenable time for people who work. So they are probably, this is not firmed up yet, but they're thinking in terms of later in the day, similar times to what we meet. After the OPA meeting, then the POB has a chance to review this process and, or review this proposal or recommendation, and there's about a week timeline there, and then that can be, then it comes up before the PPRB. There's decisions made by the PPRB, and then if there's further action, we get another chance to review the process over a period of either somewhere between 30 and 45 days, and that's a number that's being negotiated. So that's essentially the city's schedule, and then this eventually ends up at the chief's desk for review. And the whole process, as I've laid it out, this is APD's process in the top part of this chart, but I've laid out the timeline of their process. So their process as it is would be approximately 2 months from the initiation until the end of the review. During that time, the POB which is shown at the bottom of this chart, and is an attempt to show how we fit into their process, but it's essentially our own process that we've developed here, which is for when we receive materials from APD, we will designate a point of contact, and that'll usually be somebody within the Policy and Procedures Committee who will receive that, look at it, decide on the how serious this is. There may be some things that require a very cursory review. There's others that require being considered, more considered. And then, of course, there's CASA policies, which are all required that we review and make a recommendation. So that all occurs in that initial triage, if you will, and early reviews occurs within this period that between when the policy recommendation is announced at the OPA meeting and when the PPRB, the Policy and Procedure Review Board, considers it. So we think we have a policy that, or a process for making these recommendations that will, or reviewing recommendations from APD that we plan to exercise. And of course, there's the caveat that when APD's process changes, then we will have to accommodate that. So that's where we are in that. There's a second sheet which is essentially our process, and it goes through the decision tree that gets through the review process, and it distinguishes between CASA policies and non-CASA policies. And I think the thing to note with respect to CASA policies is that while we're required to review them, currently there's only 15 days allowed for our POB to review, and we'd like to negotiate that to a longer period so that we have an opportunity to meet as a board without calling a special meeting during that process. So that's under negotiation with APD, and we've had, as I've said, we've exchanged, we've sat in each other's meetings, and so I think we're in accord as to how we're going to resolve this. And I don't think we're in disagreement. We're just a matter of finding out the best way to make it work as it goes forward. So, that's that item. And the third item is that there's the investigation that, or the recommendations that were made, and as a result of the investigation into the Victoria Martin's case and how that was handled in the trade-off or the handoff between APD and CYFD. The case after our investigator, Scott Stopel, had investigated the case as a result of a citizen complaint that this had not been handled properly. It was brought to the attention of APD, and after several months, it was put onto the OPA agenda, and there was an initial discussion at that. Since that time, that was back in August, I don't have the exact date, but it was several months ago, and it's essentially stalled there. So what we're proposing is that we will draft a letter to make a recommendation, which we will bring to the board regarding how we would like to see specific policies written that describe how APD is going to hand off these kind of cases to CYFD and vice versa. So APD to CYFD. So that will be up to us to draft this letter and then bring it to the board's attention, but this is the work in progress. And would you like to, other members of the committee who might want to comment on this, I would like to invite you to do so.
Member Cass, thank you. My recollection was that we would like the board to approve that letter, the sending of that letter tonight, and that we work with Director Harness and perhaps Mr. Jackson is appropriate, so we can send this letter because it's a loophole in the policy and it's urgent and important that it get fixed. And I don't want us to be part of the sort of dragging the feet along. And so I would urge, my motion would be that you approve that we send this letter, and then we will get it ready and the chair will send it, and then you guys will be provided a copy of it at the next meeting.
Ed, would you give us a little bit more sense of what you would like to see in this letter so that the board can make a decision, an informed decision? I mean, I think that's
Well, Dr. Cass, yes. The issue was, if you recall in the Victoria Martin's case, that CYFD sent a notification to APD about an attempted kiss, and they were not able to investigate it. They didn't have the authority. They, being CYFD, did not have the authority to investigate it. Our investigation reported there was no written policy or process on that, and so because it was an attempted kiss, it was just screened out. Our position isn't that would have prevented anything happening subsequently, but the issue was that APD said, well, we get 1,400 of these, and that's probably not the exact number, but we get many of these a month. And as Paul Scotchable pointed out in his presentation, that most of those, and we haven't quantified that, but most of those have already been investigated by somebody at CYFD. They have made contact. What we're concerned about is the ones where there was no contact made, and we feel the policy should reflect that somebody goes out there. And even if it's an attempted kiss, given the nature of a child endangerment case, you need to have a little more facts on what constituted an attempted kiss, not a legal definition that it's illegal, or that it's a misdemeanor or something like that. So that's the thrust of the letter, is that we try to focus on that gap and get a policy to fill that gap.
So, excuse me, so what are you asking for us to vote on a letter you're just going to write, or? I don't feel comfortable voting on a letter I've never even read.
Well,
But that's the sense, that's why he's explaining it.
So-
What would be the content? I have a question. So from what I understood you to say, Dr. Cass and Mr. Larson, are you going to propose a policy? Because we've waited for them to come back to us, APD to come back to us with a suggestion on how they would handle this? Or are we going to propose a policy to them, or are we just saying, we haven't heard from you, and we want this on the front burner?
Member Fine, and Vice Chair St. John, I don't think that our intent was to propose a specific policy. I think our intent was to raise this issue with them and say that they have failed to either decide to do it or not to do it. They have and I have, this is not my personal knowledge with this, but you know, they say, well, CYFD doesn't send us notifications on time, and it may be something in low priority, so it wouldn't get done for 3 days, and all of those kinds of things, but it's kind of stuck in Neverland, and we want to get it unstuck, and if they don't come up with a policy, then we'll come up with a policy.
Okay, that's where I was going.
And,
Okay.
and by the way, this board has passed numerous times approvals of letters that had not been written and presented to the board, but that were approved in having confidence in Director Harness and his esteemed legal counsel. And then we would, and that's, I think, an appropriate way forward, because otherwise we're stuck with this 30-day wait again.
And so to recap, tell me if I'm wrong, you want the board to vote on a letter that would hopefully encourage APD to get unstuck on this position and relative to this, right?
That's correct, and not only unstuck, but to prioritize it.
Okay, to make it a higher priority. That is something we've done before, for sure. So do you need a motion to,
Do you want to make a motion?
do you want me to make a motion to get that approval for that letter, or?
I'll just say I so move.
Okay, I second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any opposed? Okay, this is passed unanimously.
So I think, I have one other item, and that's just, it sort of comes under the recent activities category, and that is that yesterday there was a meeting, was yesterday, right, at DOJ, and that invited amici and stakeholders to the process of reviewing the compliance plan that has been rolled out by APD. And it's an 8-page compliance plan. It shows details of who the points of contact are for at APD for complying and their tasks and deadlines to comply with provisions in the CASA. Included in that is also the policy development of APD, which is 3-52, and that's where we've been collaborating with APD. So that's an activity that comes under the purview of policy recommendations or policy development. There's going to be another meeting on Monday which is also, I believe it's by invitation, but it's a fairly open meeting to discuss the more of the 352 policy in particular. And then on Thursday, there'll be a status conference in front of Judge Brack, in which we have an opportunity to participate, to say what we want to say in regard to the our role in this in the compliance and our role in our requirements under the CASA. So we were invited at the meeting yesterday by Elizabeth Martinez, the U.S. Attorney, or Assistant, and we reserved a spot in order to get onto the status conference. There's been no decision made about the content of that, but I think the board ought to be aware of that and ought to. I'd like to have a motion discussion that we participate in that and send a representative of the board along with Director Harness to participate in that meeting, in that status conference.
The one on Monday?
The one on Thursday in front of Judge Bragg.
Okay, that was actually on my little checklist of things to follow up on from last month. That was a TBD. Do we have a time? I would imagine one of the two of you know that.
I believe it's 2:30, right?
Vice Chair
1:30.
St. John, Member Galloway. The status conference is set for 1:30 on March 15th at 421 Gold, the federal courthouse on Gold, not the Dominici Federal Courthouse. It's buried in the materials, the emails that you received this week.
Oh, apologies. Thank you.
Okay, does that conclude your report, or?
Well, I'd like to hear from the board about our representation at this status conference.
So, excuse me, Director Harness, so, of course, you'll be going to this meeting, and so, is the invitation open for one or two, or how are you moving
Well,
forward?
again, we
with
can't
this?
have a quorum.
I'm happy to
Ch-
attend.
Well, let me see, so,
Well, Vice Chair St. John, everyone, it is not a public hearing. It is a hearing for amici and stakeholders. We are all stakeholders, and you can all come to the hearing. In the past, myself and the chair or your counsel have addressed the court. It's up to you who you would like to address the court. I think I can discuss, I have in my report the issues at the status conference if you want to wait for that discussion, or if you want me to have that discussion now, I can have that discussion now. However whatever the board would like.
But isn't it true that we can't have a quorum? We couldn't have more than 4 members of the board come.
You can all come, you're not going to be making any decisions.
Okay, I just thought we couldn't be in the same room and do that. I thought we couldn't do that. I'm just trying to be clear. Okay. So Leonard, are you interested in going to that as chair?
I'll have to make that decision when I get back.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Director Harness, you said historically you and legal counsel have
And the chair.
addressed the court, is that correct?
Vice Chair St. John, Member Galloway, it's been a combination of people, and it really has been directed by the subject matter for the conference. Usually, the matters before the court are issues that the board has relating to the monitor's report that's being presented at that time. In this instance, the issues are not a monitor's report. The issues before the court are actually amending the settlement agreement by stipulation of the parties. The city, the intervener of the union, and the Department of Justice have reached stipulations to amend the settlement agreement. And what Judge Brack will be hearing on that day is whether or not we are in favor or oppose the stipulations and amending the settlement agreement.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go. Vice Chair,
Yes,
sorry, Vice Chair St. John, Director Harness, what, have we been provided with these proposed amendments to the
Vice
CASA?
Chair St. John, Member Van Deventer, yes, you have been.
Okay, I don't know that I'm in possession of them. When did they go out?
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Um,
And did
yes,
this?
Monday or Tuesday of this week.
I'm going to look at my email right now because I don't believe I've been getting everything. Did it come from you?
Vice Chair St. John, Member Van Deventer, there was a forward from the U.S. Attorney's Office with attachments.
From Ed.
Okay. Well, I think that we are going to need to, it sounds like we have a task that we need to review these amendments and determine what our position on them is. So I think we need to hold some sort of vote or have a subcommittee meeting that can address what was sent out, hopefully within the next 5 days. right?
Well,
Because
it's
this
this
is
Thursday.
March 15th that this is happening?
Vice Chair St. John, Member Van Deventer, that's correct. If you would like to have that discussion now, I can go over it with you briefly so that you can prepare yourself to read the documents.
I think
Okay,
that would be
that's fine.
wise if everyone's in agreement.
So should we just wait till your report? Is that something you were going to cover anyway, right?
Vice Chair St. John or Member Fine, however you want me to present it now or in my report, whichever one.
Your call.
Go ahead and report it now.
As Member Cass, Dr. Cass reported, we attended a meeting of the stakeholders at the U.S. Attorney's Office yesterday. And the parties, the Department of Justice and the City of Albuquerque and the union, have essentially reached an agreement in two major phases. The first phase is that paragraph 308 is going to be set aside so that there will not be an IMR 7, which is the next monitor's report that is due. And instead, there are going to be two reports to the court to present the progress on the compliance plan, which the city is filing with the court on the 15th as well. The reason and the rationale for this is that IMR 7 would be holding the new administration accountable for the actions of the old administration, in that they would be looking at data that was 6 months old and presenting it as if it were today's department with today's command staff. So in agreement with the monitor and the parties, they've agreed that they are going to hit the reset button. The monitoring team is going to come in and act as technical advisors and get the new administration up to speed. And the only reports that are going to be presented to the court are going to be reports on progress of the compliance plan that's going to be submitted, instead of reviewing use of force cases and monitoring under the traditional IMR format. That is the first agreement. That's document 354. Document 355 is an agreement to amend the settlement agreement to adopt a three-tiered use of force system. Previously, use of force was evaluated as a use of force or a serious use of force, which included an officer-involved shooting. The settlement agreement is going to be amended to adopt a three-tier system, assigning a level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 will be a lesser use of force, which will be investigated by field supervisors, and those field supervisor investigations will be submitted to the Administrative Bureau, Internal Affairs, for critique and for their thoroughness. Level 2 and level 3 will be investigated by members of the Administrative Bureau or Internal Affairs, and those investigations will go before the Force Review Board for their review. Those are the fundamental changes. During the meeting, I pointed out that the changes failed to incorporate the oversight component of the CPOA and the POB, in that the definition of serious use of force in the proposed settlement agreement has been struck and is being described as levels 2 and level 3, and does not provide for the CPOA or the POB to review in accordance with the protocol set forth from our May of 2017 agreement that says that all Force Review Board cases will be sent to the POB for review. I have been assured by the Department of Justice and the parties that that will be corrected, and the court will be notified that that issue will be corrected if it isn't corrected prior to the Thursday meeting. Bear in mind that what you received, the two stipulations and the amended settlement agreement, have already been filed with the court. So that would require a second amended settlement agreement to be filed in order to incorporate the oversight component for the review of level 2 and level 3 uses of force. So those are the issues that are going to be before Judge Brack. It is unanimous that this is how the parties want to move forward, and there has not yet been anyone or any party, amici or stakeholder, who has raised opposition to moving forward in this way.
Vice Chair St. John, Director Harness, and that includes us. I mean, that includes you. Other than the fail to incorporate the CPOA and POB as you outlined.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Larson, I do agree that I think that these stipulations are the best way to go. I believe it would be unfair to hold the department accountable, the new department accountable for the old behaviors of the department, and because of the 6-month lag, it would be inevitable that there would be a report coming out to the community that doesn't really reflect the department that they have today. I also believe that the reframing of the use of force to 3 levels will help with the efficiencies within the department so that lesser uses of force can be investigated by the field, and then has the review of the Administrative Bureau, the Force Investigation Unit, that can review that and determine whether or not those are in policy. And those are going to be a 100% review. And then for the level 2 and the level 3, going to the Force Review Board, I believe that that is a proper venue for review as well. So and it's going to create consistencies throughout the department. So you don't have 6 different investigative standards because one command investigates one way and another command investigates a different way. This is going to be centralized, and you're going to have the same sets of eyes looking at these investigations, so there'll be much more consistency, and I think that that's going to aid with the department coming into compliance much easier, and I think it's going to be a much easier use of force policy to write with these 3 levels as opposed to how the department felt like they had to try and carve out the de minimis, which became an issue, and I think that it's spelled out in a much cleaner way this way.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I do agree with you. I have one question, though. You said that the level 1 will be 100% review by IA?
Vice Chair St. John, Member Larson, that's correct.
Okay, now I have a question about where level 2 and level 3, it says IA will do the investigation, but it will go before the FRB, the Force Review Board?
That's correct.
Will that also be 100%?
That's correct.
Let's see, Vice Chair St. John, my view is that I think it would be wise to have Director Harness, and if he so desires, counsel with him to express our views at the status hearing, just because, well, for obvious reasons. However, any of us that want to go can go and attend and see what's going on. So I don't know if I need to make a motion to that effect or just express my view on it. Thank you.
I agree with you, but I think Dr. Cass had asked for a motion. And I think if it's open to everybody, then everybody can go, and we're not affected by the quorum thing, then we're good. Does that satisfy you, Dr. Cass?
I think the chair should be leading this discussion, and so.
Well, I was just reacting.
Well, he was
Yes.
she was just giving her opinion, and I agree. I mean, Director Harness will speak, and then we'll all be there, to view and see what's going on.
Yeah, I don't believe the question is whether we can attend or not. What I want to know, what I think is whether we want POB representation to speak at the status conference.
Dr. Cass, my recommendation is no, that we don't have anybody speak. We have able counsel, an excellent director, and I think that we would probably just confuse things rather than clarify things based upon our performance on electing officers.
I agree with that, sir.
Vice Chair St. John, there has been a question raised, and I want to be clear about the attendance of a quorum. So what the Open Meetings Act says is that all meetings of a quorum of members of any policy-making body, I'm not going to go through the whole list there, held for the purpose of formulating public policy, including the development of personnel, policy, rules, regulations, or ordinances, discussing public business, or for the purpose of taking any action within the authority of or the delegated authority of policy-making body, is declared to be open to the public. So this is going to be something that is not within the authority or the delegated authority of this body. Right? This has to deal with the parties to the settlement agreement. But that said, if a quorum of the board is there, there should be absolutely no discussion of board business.
That's fine. Yes.
Vice Chair St. John, I don't object to what Jim has said, but I do think that we need, if we are going to have, I probably will attend myself. And I think that, if Director Harness is going to make a presentation, I think it needs to be clear that he is representing us as well as the CPOA. That way they know they're hearing from us. I also think it's important that we review this ourselves. It sounds okay to me. I am concerned about the level 3 use of force, leaving out the CPOA and leaving the POB out. That's very concerning. It sounds like we have assurances that there will be an amendment and hopefully filed on that same day. Is that correct, Director Harness?
Vice Chair St. John and Member Van Deventer, I did not receive an assurance that it would be filed the day of the status conference. I did not receive that. I simply received assurances from the Department of Justice and the U.S. attorneys that the problem would be rectified. And the court would be put on notice that day, not necessarily that it would be written notice.
Okay, and has Judge Brack signed off on what's been filed thus far, or is he waiting until this hearing?
Vice Chair St. John and Member Van Deventer, he is waiting for the presentation. The documents were filed, but the presentation will be made to the court on the 15th for his decision.
Okay. So I propose that at least the policy and procedure subcommittee review these and meet prior to the 15th. And if we're not going to represent ourselves, then we have, any specific concerns ready for Director Harness to represent on our behalf. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Well, I'm on that committee, and I'm not exactly sure how comfortable I would be if I came up with something that I didn't think was right without having this board weigh in on it, because I don't think it's the subcommittee's authority to vote on any kind of policy issue, and this would be a policy issue. And so we can meet, but I'm confident that, I think one of your concerns maybe, Member Van Deventer, is that you haven't been involved in this. This has been an ongoing thing for 3 or 4 months, I think. And the fact that it's going to be put on notice at the court, because I shared your concerns about the use of force and failed to include us. So I would think that our individual meeting might be unnecessary, and we'd be prohibited from actually making a recommendation to Mr. Harness, representing the entire board.
Okay.
If I could add, I agree with Member Larson in that I think we're well represented by Director Harness in this, and I think it's a matter of if we were to attend and appear, it's more to just be identified with the Oversight Board, but I think for the most part, the substantive comments will be made by Director Harness, and I think we can trust that he's had the proper considerations for that. I think I only raise the issue of attendance in terms of being showing a presence and a solidarity in this process. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to take a position other than what the director's considered position would be. So I'm happy to have, to leave it with his, in his hands.
Okay.
So do we need a vote on my motion, or is anybody, maybe it just dies, that,
It can just die because you all, or just withdrawn.
I'm sorry,
I'm
excuse.
sorry.
Or did you want to have a motion in place just to have on the record that we are authorizing Director Harness to speak on behalf of not only the CPOA, but the POB? I think that was a question you had raised, right?
that's exactly right, and I think it also answers Member Vandevitter's question to be sure that it was, that in the comments that Director Harness said that his comments are representing the POB as well as the CPOA.
I think that's a fair
Yeah,
thing to
if you want to
move
get a
on.
motion.
So my motion is, to clarify, my motion is that Director Harness represent us at the March meeting that's not open to the public, and express his opinion on the minutes, including our concerns about being excluded, as you noted, and that he include that he is representing the board and we have supported his position, or the position that he's going to present.
And I
Okay.
second that.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's so moved unanimously. Okay, so now we have case review subcommittee. Jan, you want to give
Leonard, did you want to
a report?
give the report? The only item is appeals, and there were none. You want to?
Yeah, right. The only thing we really discussed were the cases, so there's no real report other than the cases we discussed previously. So I don't have anything to report.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next, we have the Personnel Committee.
All right, I'll make this very quick. When we did Ed's appraisal, there was some confusion on the questions and how they pertain to either his administration of the office or his execution of that particular topic. So I passed out some handouts to you all, and what I'm proposing is that we change and update the evaluation to be 3 parts. The 3 parts be sent out to, one to the POB board itself, the second part sent out to the staff, and the third part sent out to whoever we want to hear from in the public. The scale will still remain 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high. Each question would have text entries after that rating to elaborate if they wanted to do so. And there would also be 3 text-only entry questions, which would be unscored, also available for the board and the CPOA staff. Input from the CPOA and POB will be used in scoring, but input from the public will not. It'll only be text, so we have a feeling of what's going on and what's going on in the public and Ed's performance out in the public. This again will be distroed on SurveyMonkey. I won't go again and try to do a PDF and send that out electronically. There was some confusion with that. We have the resources now to do SurveyMonkey, so that's the intent, is to press forward with that. So you have a list of questions, both for the POB members, the CPOA staff, and the other stakeholders. What I wanted is some input from Ed and from the board and making sure that we're covering all our bases in getting a very good evaluation. I did use the original questions and made sure that those topics were covered, so they're included in here, because that's how we recruited Ed on. And I think that was important to include, so. If you could please review and just give me the okay to thumbs up to press forward with that and putting up the Survey Monkey together.
So can we do that after, subsequent to
Yes.
this meeting?
Mm.
So by when do you want it done?
You can just shoot me an email.
Okay, in a week?
A week, that's
Yeah.
fine. And I'll send this out electronically. I should probably just do that as well.
Thank you for doing that, Eric.
Thank you. Okay, now we have a report from the city staff.
I'm sorry,
I'm
can I follow up with,
Sure.
last month we had talked about amending Director Harness's contract, and you and I think Julian were going to discuss that.
Correct.
Do we have any movement on that
No
at all?
movement yet, because I wanted to get this done first and make sure that we have a good, when we redo the contract, I want to make sure that we have a good evaluation in place before we go ahead and do that. But I haven't sat down with Mr. Moya yet.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, now we have a report from the city staff. We have APD.
Good evening, Vice Chair St. John, honorable board members. For the month of February, APD dispatched 41,984 calls for service. That's a decrease from January of 2,794. Total cases completed for the month were 5. All of those were completed by the Internal Affairs section. We did not administratively close any of those cases. Discipline imposed. We had 1 training related to a vehicle accident, 1 letter of reprimand for unauthorized leave and unpaid leave status, 1 8-hour suspension for conduct, and 1 termination for failure to comply with laws, rules, and regulations. Pending cases for February, 24. Cases open for February were 7. We distributed 154 EIRS alerts for the month. That's partially due to us catching up on our backlog of job well dones. So for the month, we distributed 137 for job well dones, 12 for use of force, 1 vehicle crash, 1 for vehicle pursuit, 1 for firearms discharge, and 1 additional concern for minor misconduct related to use of force. And I stand for any questions.
Any questions?
I'd just like to make a comment. Congratulations on becoming commander.
Oh, thank
Just
you.
applause to
Thank you,
you.
ma'am. Thank you.
Vice Chair St. John, unfortunately, since I guess I'm filling Dr. David Ring's position, I'm duty-bound to ask a question from Internal Affairs. Let's see. The question I have is, these findings, I'm assuming that you're meeting with Director Harness regularly on your internal investigations, and is that a correct assumption?
Vice Chair St. John and Board Member Larson, no, we do not meet regularly. We do discuss cases on occasion. Director Harness does have access to our database for read-only access for several cases. Correct, and he just pointed out to me that he also receives a weekly update.
Okay, so the weekly update is just a document that he receives?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, okay, that's, I guess that's just basically my question on that. I did want to take this opportunity to thank you for coming to the Sunday afternoon training last week. And I was particularly impressed that Sergeant Philip Block said he had a bachelor's degree in nutrition, a master's degree in nutrition, and he said he had a PhD, but I didn't catch what that PhD was in or where it might have been from.
Vice Chair St. John and Board Member Larson, it has something to do with statistics. I really don't know what it is.
With statistics?
Yes, sir.
And you don't know where he went to school?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay, thank you very much.
More pressing question, do we have a new baby? He's got it.
Vice Chair St. John and Board Member Galloway, no, not as of 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Thank you. Okay.
This is Deputy Garcia.
Okay, now we have Deputy Chief Garcia.
Good evening, Vice Chair, honorable board members. Update this week is, like Director Harness stated and Dr. Cass has stated, that we had 2 meetings this week with the amici, one yesterday and one today. And Monday, we are having another one regarding 352, and we appreciate all the input from the board on the policy approval process, because it's been a work in progress, and that's one of the main policies we need approved, so we can move forward with the other processes as well. I'd like to clarify one thing. We had a email from Paul Killebrew from the DOJ, and the concerns of Mr. Harness that he brought up yesterday. I believe they're going up the chain in the DOJ right now, and they're hoping to file an amendment tomorrow. So that's good news.
I'm sorry, to what?
With the concerns regarding the POB and CPOA on the review of the uses of force,
Okay.
on the amendment to the settlement agreement. Next week, starting the Monday the 12th, Dr. Ginger will be here and some of his team will be here. And they'll be working with us intensely on technical assistance, because we have a whole new group of people who are involved in the process. And so they'll be working with us on job task analysis, complete staff work, a process for problem solving, basically. He is suggested to us called GoMaps. He's been working with us intensely, my bureau, and also a lot of the project leads on the compliance plan. So that's going to be happening within the next week. The 26th and the 27th, Mr. Phil Coyne and Mr. Billy Toms will be in town to discuss use of force issues. Looking forward to that discussion as well when they come to town. We're also planning, and you're invited as well to this. I'm planning on having regularly scheduled meetings approximately every about 6 weeks, no later than 6 weeks, on a regular basis, so we can go over any concerns, any changes we're proposing, and I'd like to have a dialogue continuous throughout the whole year, instead of just having conversations before a status hearing or a court hearing. I want to have a continuous dialogue. That way, if there's any issues that you want brought to the table, we can address them at that time.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
2 things. The last meeting, we talked about the access to the Garrity materials, and I understood that Commander Garcia said that we could make arrangements. Did you clear that with the chief? Are we cool with nights and weekends and trying to figure out a way for us to, for those who work full-time? We had discussed that at the last meeting.
Vice Chair St. John, board member Fine. Yes, we talked to the chief and he's fine with it. Commander Garcia will be arranging that. I don't want to step on her toes at all.
Heaven forbid. Okay, so that's a yes.
Yes.
We're clear. Okay, the second thing was, I want to express my gratitude for how well most of the training went for this past 2 weekends. But there were some issues with the use of force piece of that, which were expressed by the 4 members of the board who went to that. And have you been made aware of those concerns?
Vice Chair St. John, board member Fine. Yes, I have. That's why I brought Commander Sullivan from the training academy here, just in case you had any questions as far as how he's handled the situation at the academy. It was brought to my attention over the weekend. Elizabeth Martinez called me from U.S. Attorney's Office to let me know on Saturday evening. So I was aware of it. I have not yet viewed the videotape. I'm planning on viewing the videotape hopefully this weekend of the first weekend. But yes, there were concerns, and I've talked to Commander Sullivan about it as well.
Okay. Does anybody want to, that was at the training, want to chime in? I just want to make sure you were aware of it. That's all.
Yes, ma'am.
Vice Chair St. John, Deputy Chief Garcia, I I'm not going to talk about that incident. I think it needs to be looked into. But the thing I wanted to say was the reality-based training. In my experience, and I have a little experience in law enforcement, but it was very, very well done. I commend Ray DeFreitas, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And the whole staff out there, because the focus was on doing the right thing, applying your cognitive skills under pressure. But it wasn't the screaming and yelling that I have been used to. And it was more geared toward making them successful and understanding how to make those decisions. And so I think that it was light years ahead of FATS. And I just would commend you and the department for that, that training, and urge you to continue to improve it. They were outstanding from my perspective. I'm speaking for me, obviously. Thank you.
Vice Chair St. John, Board Member Larson, thank you. Commander Sullivan, obviously here he runs the training academy, but they've done a tremendous job out there, I agree. It's much more realistic than the old FATS machine. It brings decision-making into account, but it makes the officer also justify what he did. And it's more of a learning environment instead of a negative experience for the officer.
That's all I had.
I'd like to echo that. I think that the general attitude to receiving new information was also expressed by Ray DeFreitas. Is it DeFreitas or DeFreitas?
DeFreitas.
Thank you. And I was very impressed with the process that had been developed, and I think that's what everyone's after, is to get a process that creates a good training scenario and results in good policing. And I think that he certainly models that sort of behavior, and I think I'd like to add my thanks for that.
Vice Chair St. John, Board Member Cass, thank you, sir. Officer DeFreitas has probably over 30 years of law enforcement experience with APD. So he brings that knowledge, and he's adapted really well to the changes within APD. So I'm glad that training went well.
And now we have all vetted board members who can vote on cases.
That's a very good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, now we have the city council.
Madam Vice Chair, board members, I wanted to update you on 01755. This is a legislation that prohibits boards, commissions, and advisory groups from hosting political forums. The council has approved a substitute bill. That substitute clarifies that while it restricts public bodies from organizing and hosting a forum, it does not restrict members from serving, restrict members serving on those boards, commissions, committees from engaging in political activities outside of the course or scope of their duties on those boards or commissions or committees. That bill will be on the agenda for the March 19th council meeting, on the agenda for final action. I'm not sure if it will be moved or not, but it will be on the agenda for the March 19th meeting. In regards to the proposed changes to the police oversight ordinance, I'm continuing to set up meetings with Board Member Cass and Mr. Harness, and it sounds like, from what I understand from Mr. Harness, there may be some court-approved changes at the meeting on the 15th that may need to be incorporated into the ordinance. So once we have word that those need to be incorporated, we'll have Chris Melinders in our office add those to the proposed ordinance. And with that, I stand for any questions.
I have a comment or some additions, and that is that we've we had a meeting with Councilor Benton a few weeks ago where he agreed to sponsor the ordinance changes. I don't know if I reported that last time or not. But since that time, in fact, today we met with Councilor Sanchez and discussed the general subject of ordinance changes, and also the desire to have more communication with the city council through the a reporting process where we get a few minutes in front of the council, as is customary for a number of boards, so that we can report our results. So that was well received, I think, on both sides, and I think Director Harness will be coordinating something with John Zaman, I believe that's right. So, and then Monday we have a meeting scheduled with Councilor Winter to discuss the same issues of ordinance support, and we're hoping to get enlist his support on these ordinance changes. So that's the status from my viewpoint too. And I don't think that's the end. I think we're going to continue to try to arrange meetings so that we can get broad-based council support and communicate with the council. I think one of the things that Councilor Sanchez expressed today was that he wanted to be sure that there was no, he thought there was no perception of interference, and he wants to, reinforce the view that there is, that the council is, is very careful that they don't want to be perceived as interfering with our function. I don't think there's ever been any suggestion of that, but I mean, he's certainly very, very aware of the potential, because in the ordinance it says we are independent. I think he reinforced that independence today. At the same time, I think he was receptive to the idea that we should be communicating more, and I think that's to the benefit of both sides. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next we have the city attorney. I mean the mayor's office, excuse me.
I don't know that oh, yes. This is Mr. Lewis.
Well, welcome, Mr. Lewis.
Madam Vice Chair, St. John, members of the board, my name is James Lewis, and I'm here just to get acquainted tonight. I've been on board for about 2.5 weeks, and I've been very, very busy, been out attending some of the CPC meetings. But let me just give you a little background about me, who I am, because some of you on the board may not know. I did serve as the COO under Marty Chavez and the CAO under Marty Chavez. I have served as the city manager for the city of Rio Rancho, served as the chief of staff to the late Governor Bruce King in his last term. I was elected to state treasurer 3 terms, and also appointed for 1 term. Assistant Secretary, U.S. Department of Energy. Had a chance to be a criminal investigator across the street when the courthouse next door with Ira Robinson, and also with Steve Schiff. I served in the military as a military policeman as well. So this is near and dear to my heart. I'm here to work very diligently, as hard as I can, to see what I can do. My title is basically Senior Advisor for Public Safety, sort of monitoring the settlement agreement. And I have been meeting in the courthouse this past week with all the meetings of the stakeholders. Been over the ACLU. Scheduled a little later on this month to meet with some of the business community. People from the business community as well as the faith community have called me. And a lot of other entities have asked if they could visit with me. So I'm here to see what I can do. We have, this is, I think, a great city. It's going to take all of us working together to solve whatever issues, because we got to put the police back in the community. We got to get the community back in policing, and I think that's what it's all about. I was as a kid growing up in South Broadway. The police were there. We knew them by first name. They knew all the community leaders. They knew all the clergy. They knew the leaders in the respective community, and I just think that these are the types of things that I really feel that I can contribute and see if we can pull this community together, that we're working together for the good of the city.
Sir, may I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Lewis, it is my great pleasure, and I think a joy for everybody who does know you, and everybody knows you by reputation, that this is a great thing that you have agreed to do. You keep trying to retire, sir, and we keep not letting you. And that is because your level of vision and commitment to this city is unmatched, and we are all certain of your ethical standards. And thank you for your service. I appreciate you.
Okay. Madam Vice Chair of St. John, thank you. Member Fine, I really appreciate that. And if there's anything I can do, and I'm going to be working with Mr. Harness and also the rest of your staff there, if there's something that you feel that I can help with, you know, just don't hesitate to call. Instead of Sarita coming down, I think I will be coming to a lot of the meetings here. And my concern is to make sure that doing everything we can to make this a great city, as it is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the city attorney?
Good evening, Vice Chair St. John, members. I do not have an update for you tonight, but similar to Mr. Lewis, I appear before you tonight to introduce myself. My name is Esteban Aguilar Jr. I am the newly appointed city attorney for the city of Albuquerque, pending confirmation, of course, by the council. I'm always in honor, it's an honor and awe of Mr. Lewis, and he's one of those public servants that we are incredibly lucky to have. And if I could have just a fraction of the accomplishments that he has made on behalf of the people of the city of Albuquerque as well as the state of New Mexico, then I will have done a good job. I look forward to working with the board on behalf of the residents of the city of Albuquerque, and I will attend as much as I am able to, but I am looking forward to it and want to thank you for letting me appear before you tonight.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Congratulations. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. Okay, the CPC?
Yes, Chris.
There you are.
Good evening, Chair St. John, board members, Chris Sylvan with the CPCs. We're starting our CPC meetings next week. We're going to start on Monday with the Foothills, and then Tuesday, I believe it's the Northeast, that's correct. Southwest is not going to have a CPC meeting this week because there's going to be the CPC Summit, and I'll let Mr. Harness talk more about that. We're really excited about that. There's only one recommendation that came out of the CPCs this month. The Foothills put forward a recommendation to have APD use print and other types of media to inform the citizens about auto theft, how to not become a victim of the auto theft. The chief loved it, and we're moving forward on that. We also had several members attend the Citizen Policing Academy these last 2 weekends, and now they're official. Also, Dr. Rickman from the monitoring team is coming to town April 7th, that's a Saturday, from 10 to 2, and he's going to be doing a training, and everybody's invited. So with that, that's my report. Stand for any questions.
Would you just tell the new board members who Dr. Rickman is?
Oh, sorry. Dr. Rickman's with the independent monitoring team. He's over the paragraphs that govern the CPC and community policing.
And this April 7th meeting is where?
It's at the main library from 10 until 2. We'll serve food.
Thank you, Chris.
All right,
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, now we have Director Harness.
Vice Chair St. John, fellow board members, we have resurrected the template for the business cards, and we have sent in a requisition to make business cards for everyone so that You will not be having to give out your personal information. Ms. Bustos is working on that, and so we will get those printed up and we will get them out to you as soon as we receive them. I believe it was today you did receive an Excel spreadsheet, very colorful, denoting the monitor's visits, dates and times and locations, and who is the person of contact for those. We are meeting with Mr. Giaquinto the morning of the 15th. In that discussion, he's going to be reviewing our new intake process, which dictates that the complaint is in, it's reviewed by the investigator for 7 business days to determine where it's going to flow, whether it's going to go to mediation if we in fact ever get our MOU in place, if it's something that can be administratively closed, or if it's something that can go to the command staff to handle, or if it needs to be investigated. At the end of those 7 business days, there will be a determination that it's going to be on one of those 5 tracks. The investigators will then open their case in the case management system, and they will work the case for the 90-day period. Or if they ask for an extension, they will submit those documents to the chief, and those will be tracked with our external tracking document. I think that will be that will be about the gist of our conversations with Mr. Giaquinto. He's satisfied with the quality of investigations, and there is still the lingering issues of consistency with the matrix. Those differences have not yet been an issue with the new administration. There was, this board recommended a termination of an officer in previous cases, and I can report to you that that officer resigned in lieu of termination.
And Giaquinto is coming when?
He's coming in on Wednesday at noon, so he will be here for the CPC Summit, which is occurring on the 14th at 6 p.m. It is open to the public, however, you must have a ticket to attend. And we expect in attendance the mayor, other city staff, John Anderson, the new U.S. attorney, members of the CPCs, and we have put together a tentative agenda to allow the CPCs to express their history to the mayor. We're also trying to, they are going to be able to question the mayor about his vision moving forward, and then the mayor is going to have time to address the CPCs. We expect the meeting to last from 6 until 8. It's going to be in the Plaza del Sol building in the basement. Ms. Bustos has done a good job of tracking our attendance so that we had only a limited number of general public tickets that we could put out to allow for maximum participation from the CPCs, because this is really their meeting with the mayor so that they can discuss issues with the mayor, and that's how we're going to move that forward.
And could you explain, I don't know that the new board members know who Mr. Giaquinto is either.
Mr. Giaquinto is he's our monitor. He's part of the monitoring team. He's responsible for internal affairs and the CPOA, POB paragraphs. You also received a draft copy of the City of Albuquerque's compliance plan. That draft is, according to Dr. Ginger, going to be adding 3 other columns. Those 3 other columns are going to be goals, objectives, and measures. So that when this compliance plan is filed with the court on Thursday, it's going to include those measures as well. So what you received is a draft, and it is, at this point, incomplete. You also received a copy of the city's proposed draft of 3-52, the policy on policy development. We are scheduled to discuss that with the city on the 12th at 2 p.m. at the U.S. Attorney's Office. So if you have input for the members that are attending that meeting, at this point, I believe Dr. Cass and Member Larson have committed to go to that meeting. I will be there as well. So if you have comments regarding that policy on policy, you can share that with them so that they can come to the discussion armed with your thoughts. We discussed the stipulations and the amended settlement agreement, which was attached and forwarded from the Department of Justice, Ms. Martinez. I have to step back a little bit. Mr. Sylvan and I will be meeting with the mayor on the 14th at 11:30 to finalize the agenda for the CPC summit. Four members and myself, along with Ms. Martinez from the U.S. Attorney's Office, did attend the Citizens Police Academy over the past 2 weekends. And I think generally we were all in agreement that we were pleased that it was put together. We were pleased that it was presented. A couple of the sections had some minor corrections that were brought forth, I believe, in the critiques of the courses. And then there were some larger issues. The issues with the use of force training are not settled at this point. They are going to be a discussion with the U.S. Attorney and the monitor, and I'm sure the city attorney, as I brought it to Mr. Schmiel's attention the next week. Not only was it the content of the use of force, which I found it to be much less as a defensive posture, and it was much more of an offensive posture and an indoctrination into why we have to use the force we use, with using some research from the Force Science Institute, which many agree is not fully vetted. And then there was the demeanor of the instructor, which was less than hospitable, shall we say. So that is an ongoing issue. There was also the issue of the department Saturday afternoon deciding that they were going to kick off out of the Citizens Police Academy a member of the community policing councils. And this decision was made by command within the academy and forced upon the lieutenant and the sergeant on scene to inform this person that they were being removed. Luckily, there was some intervention with members of the POB here, myself, and the U.S. Attorney, and she was reinstated so she could finish and become a voting member of the CPC. I can't stress enough how much we disagreed with that decision, how short-sighted it was, and how it is a manifestation or an illustration of the perception that the department controls the CPCs, and they're not there for the public, that they're there for the department. And it was extremely disappointing that those steps were taken and we had to intervene in that way. I am happy, however, that they were responsive to our concerns and they did rectify the problem. My other concern about the training is that this training was for a very select audience, an audience that is reviewing policies, recommendations, and doing oversight. And my concern is that that type of training for a citizen may not be reflective of the responsibilities of the department and their responsibilities for community-oriented policing. So, moving forward, I'm hoping that they will make those adjustments. We will continue to have that discussion about the use of force training. We had 147 applicants for Ms. Contreras' position.
Good.
The HR department forwarded to me 30 of the top applicants, and I'll be interviewing 10 of them tomorrow for a first round of interviews. Last but not least, we are still at a stalemate with the contract for ISR. Attorney Jackson has expressed his desires for the city to move forward with something concrete that we can actually respond to, as opposed to a nebulous, you need to tell us how to define how you want to curtail your access to the data that you're going to request, which is essentially they're asking us to bargain against ourselves at this point. And it really is, I think, a pretty bad argument, because anything that they're trying to shield from us or they're indicating that they're having issues with, a member of the public could file an IPRA request and get that information. So Attorney Jackson will counsel you on what the next step is going to take for us to be able to move forward and get this contract signed. And that's it for me. I stand for questions.
Vice Chair St. John, may I say something before you start with the Attorney Jackson? When did we first attempt to negotiate this contract? Do you recall the date we started?
Vice Chair St. John, Board Member Larson, I do not. I'd have to look it up. I could get the date.
When
But
did
it's
Miriam
been,
leave?
it's,
When did Miriam leave?
it's easily been 5 months since we've sent it to procurement for it to be signed so we could start the work.
That's sufficient. That's just what I need. My view is, and I've only been on this board a short time, but my view is that's a conscious decision by somebody in the attorney's office, in the city attorney's office. And Mr. Aguilar, I would ask you to pay attention to this particular, not me, but this particular issue, because I think it's a willful, intentional attempt to prevent us from meeting the compliance in the order where we're supposed to do research. And it makes no sense. We've had our attorney negotiating with them, and my motion in a minute, after the attorney finishes, is going to be to seek legal action against the city for dragging their feet. It's a simple contract with the University of New Mexico Social Science Research Center, as I understand it, and it includes a former research person that worked here for us. And we need to have that decision made and have the city and the mayor or whoever decide who's holding this up and give us a real reason why. Because, like I said, I think it's, in fact, Mr. Lewis, you may be interested in this, because it is an attempt, in my view, to keep us from being able to do our job. And I think I'm going to bring it up with a monitor if we don't get, or the DOJ, if we don't get some action from somebody in the city. I mean, we've been doing all the right things with all the right people, except the right people in the city attorney's office, and it is unconscionable. Thank you.
Vice Chair St. John?
Yes, our attorney, did you have something to say, sir? Oh,
Vice Chair St. John, not at this time, but
okay.
just in case there are questions.
Okay.
Sorry about that. On the research topic, I would like the board to request Mr. Jackson's counsel on whether or not we have any litigation options to address this issue, because we might not be all the way there, but it seems that we might be getting close to that place. And so it would be wise of us, I think, to understand what options we have, in case that is an eventuality. Hopefully we won't have to enter litigation with the city, but in the event. And then I also had a question for Director Harness, pertaining to the use of force training. I think you mentioned that you had a meeting or you spoke with Mr. Schmiel about that training. And were there any other representatives from the city of Albuquerque, whether that be the attorneys, the police force, the administration, or other members of APD besides Mr. Schmiel who were there?
Vice Chair St. John, member Van Deventer, no. This was a telephone conversation that I had with Mr. Schmiel.
Okay.
Regarding the Sunday training, the use of force training. And I was relaying my concerns because Mr. Schmiel has sat on the Force Review Board with me, and this particular officer is presented as a subject matter expert with which he and I have disagreed on a number of occasions. And so I pointed the training out to him, and he told me that he would in fact review the training video because that day was recorded. But there were no other members that I'm aware of for that phone conversation. I'm certainly aware that others reviewed it because it was presented as the justification for kicking out the Community Policing Council member.
Okay. And did you feel that Mr. Schmiel was responsive to the issues that you had raised?
Vice Chair St. John, Attorney Van Deventer, yes.
Okay.
I did feel that he was responsive. And he's probably going to be part of the conversation that we have moving forward with the U.S. Attorney and the monitoring team.
Okay. And I would appreciate if you could keep us apprised of any next steps on that issue, as well as if there are any ways in which you advise the POB to be responsive regarding this particular issue, because almost half of the board was there and we all were in agreement with the issues that were presented. And so this is a conversation that I'm sure you're going to continue, and I'm happy about that, but also a conversation that the Police Oversight Board needs to continue as well.
Certainly, Vice Chair St. John and Ms. Member Van Deventer, when we do schedule that, I will certainly advise, and those that are available can attend that meeting so that they can express their views as well.
Thank you.
Others?
Any others?
And so I do have a motion.
Okay.
And the motion is that we ask our counsel to explore the possibility of litigation regarding the research problem, the research contract problem.
Second.
Could we delay discussion on that until we hear from our counsel?
Yes.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Van Deventer, Member Cass. So we met with the then Chair Fine and, or was that after the meeting?
No, I was chair.
Yeah, and Director Harness, and Deputy Chief Garcia and Mr. Schmiel. And prior to the meeting, we provided a draft of a memorandum of understanding that was very broad and very flexible in terms of giving the Institute for Social Research the ability to get the information that it needs in a timely fashion. At that meeting, what we received in response was a comment that it was just too broad, that it didn't address what data we wanted, and that for items that were not susceptible to a database search, paper records, that the time frame for responding was too short. We were not provided with any alternative terms. We were not provided with any listing of the databases that are maintained. After the meeting, we didn't get a final answer until after the meeting, and Mr. Schmiel said that our MOU was not acceptable, but again, he didn't propose an alternative. So we responded saying that we had hoped for a more substantive response. We received that response on Monday, although it still didn't include a draft of an MOU. So we still don't know what it exactly is that the city is wanting to propose here, and we're at a disadvantage because we want, to the extent that an MOU is necessary, and that's one of the things that we proposed, is maybe having a meeting with the new city attorney and the folks from procurement to determine whether the MOU is necessary. Mr. Schmiel contends that it is. But we don't know how many databases there are that involve APD that may be relevant to ISR's work under the contract. We don't know what databases there may be in the future, and we don't necessarily want to enumerate the databases, because if we do that, then we run into a situation where the MOU has to be updated every time the technology changes, and that's not really ideal. But the city's response, the biggest concern that I had is that there had been allusions to this issue before, but it is clear from the most recent response that they are concerned about the scope of data to which ISR will have access. And we are not inclined to recommend that the board agree or the CPOA agree to any MOU that would permit lesser access than is permitted under the ordinance.
May I ask?
I just asked. So at that meeting, there were two things that I recall. One is they wanted us to define what data we would be looking for and what the limits on costs would be. Yet when you look at our duty to perform from the city council, it says that we will have access to whatever is required for us to have access to in order to do that. We can't know what we might ask in the future, nor are we willing to limit that. And the cost is not our problem. I'm not saying it's not a problem, it's just not our problem. So those are the two sticking points, both of which seem unreasonable to me. And I think for those of us who were there representing the CPOA and the BOB, if we are to have legitimate oversight over the police department, we can't say now what we're not going to ask for, and nor should we. We shouldn't be, because if we did, we would be offering a qualified AOK on the police department, not an open support of the police department, or have any certainty that what we might have asked for, that we couldn't because of this MOU, was not germane to the public and the public's interest. It is a ridiculous request. I couldn't agree more with Ms. Van de Venter and Mr. Larson, and I agree that we should move forward. We have been without a data analyst, and this problem with the MOU is the most recent, but before that we had trouble trying to fill the position, trying to alter the position to get something else. We've had problems with this for over a year. It is only this last 7 months that is about the MOU, or 5 months, whatever it is. All of it is too long, and all of it has prevented us from being able to produce data, which is part of our commitment to the City Council.
Can you tell me how this couples into the data warehouse project at APD? How much of the data that APD has ongoing? I talked to the Mark Leach at APD several months ago to understand the project, and I haven't heard much since. But that's not APD's fault. I just haven't stayed informed. I'm curious as to how much of what we're looking for potentially is already organized within the data warehouse, or is that even relevant? I guess can you tell me more about that, please?
Vice Chair St. John and Member Cass, I can talk a little bit about that. The data warehouse does not appear to be an issue. We won't know for sure until we see the draft that's forthcoming from the City Attorney's Office of their proposed MOU. But based on the discussions we've had, it doesn't sound like the data warehouse is going to be a problem. Now, what is potentially a problem, and again, this goes back to one of the issues that I was discussing before, is that if you have an MOU that has a broad scope and just talks about access to data that tracks the language of the ordinance and provides ISR with access to the scope of the information it needs without enumerating the databases, then that's one approach. The other potential approach would be the enumeration of various databases and other repositories of information. The data warehouse, I still don't know if there's a formal name for that. It seems a little bit colloquial, and I'm not sure that saying data warehouse in an MOU is going to get the job done.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Vice Chair St. John. This is, we are supposed to be an independent organization, although we're required to follow the city ordinance in purchasing and things like that. Am I correct? So there's only one way that they can stymie us, is by throwing roadblocks in our way in complying with the city ordinance in purchasing and acquisition. I mean, assume that I'm correct, that they want us a roadblock. That's one way to do it. Otherwise, they can't interfere with our independence.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Larson, I am not going to ascribe motives to the city and to the City Attorney's Office. I would note that over the course of the history of this board, we have seen other avenues besides procurement that it appeared that there was less than full cooperation. We hope that this is a new day, and it may be that that's it, that there's a turnover in administration and there's uncertainty about how the city wants to approach this, because we're still getting the new administration in place. I just don't know, but that doesn't affect the board's need to get this done.
I agree with you. This is a new day, and in action and word, I have seen new behaviors from the department that have been very positive. This is one that seems to be a holdover, and it is completely within the authority of the mayor's office and the city attorney's office to fix this, and they haven't. And that's what's making me wonder about this commitment to this reset that we've talked about. We have a right to staff people as we need them, as long as it's within our budget, and that's exactly what Director Harness has done. In fact, it's a reduction in cost of having a full-time person. So I just am commenting on the motion, I think, that's still pending, and that is seeking litigation options. And my view is that I believe it's been seconded, and so I think we ought to call the question.
Okay.
How does the contract with, how does it differ from when we had an employee as a part of this in terms of the access? I mean, how was data access defined in the previous situation, if at all? And is that part of the problem, is having to define data access, whereas with an employee or with a member of the board seeking this request, it seems to me that it's more difficult to deny that request because now we're acting on the part of the board. But
Vice Chair St. John and Member Cass, I'll let Director Harness speak a little bit more to the past practice to the extent that he's able. That question is probably best directed to Dr. Verpluw. But you have correctly identified at least one concern identified by the city, which is they are concerned about this information leaving a city body and going to a state body. And they are concerned about potential uses of the information other than for the purposes of the contract. I don't believe that's an issue, and if there's concern, that may be an area where we can come to a resolution on that particular item pretty quickly, because it's certainly not the intent of what either the ISR contract or the MOU that I prepared, that the information be used for any purpose other than POB and CPOA purposes.
It seems to me that is solvable. And we can certainly the University of New Mexico research entities have other clients in which they have to keep things circumspect and have rules relative to that. We are trying to define their problem, and that's the problem, okay? It's their problem, and we don't understand it, so nor do we agree with it. So I think that the motion needs to be dealt with, unless somebody else has a question.
I called the question.
Yeah. Call the question. Can we wait for Valerie? Should we wait? I know how she's going to vote, but I can't vote for her. She'll be right back.
Perhaps, Dr. Cass, to address your question, it's a question that I ask, specifically because APD itself has used this same entity to do research on their behalf. So I find it a bit ironic. When we had an employee, our employee was instrumental in helping them formulate their data warehouse. And in the data warehouse at this point, there is the information to produce our annual report or our semi-annual report. That information is there. But if you look at Dr. Ginger's IMR 6 report, the data is not construed properly in order for the department to comply with paragraph 298 of the settlement agreement. And I think it's imperative that we have somebody in place as these new criteria are being set up so that we can fully flesh out the data as the monitor wants it to be set up.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table, and we have a second, right? Okay.
would you repeat the motion, please?
You repeat.
Yes, the motion is simply that we have our counsel explore the possibility of litigation in the event that that becomes an eventuality.
Okay, and we have a second on that?
We do. All those in favor?
All of those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, this passes. Any opposed? And this passes unanimously. Okay, next thing we have a meeting with council, pending litigation or?
We don't have anything.
Okay, we don't have anything. Okay, anything under other business?
We still have the open question on whether or not we'd have a special meeting next week. Was that going to be available?
He was
Vice
gonna
Chair of
check.
St. John, Member Cruz, I'm unable to access that because the city's website isn't letting me in to view the schedule at this point. So tomorrow I will put out a number of dates and I'll get a consensus and we'll get it set up.
Very good, thank you.
Okay.
Vice Chair St. John, a quick question. If this room isn't available for a special meeting, is there another room that might be available that won't be not in compliance, that will be in compliance with the ordinance? And I think it's just something that we need to look at. We don't need to address it right now. But if there is an option available in the ordinance to a special meeting to have it recorded and videotaped if possible, then I think we ought to consider that. Because I think we should get this done in March. And I don't want this lack of availability of this room to keep us from being able to do it. Thank you. No need to comment or vote or anything like that.
I just wanted to bring up one other thing in other business. Chantel brought up last time about having a welcoming committee. The next time the board meets, we should probably put that on there. And if you have some ideas about how that could happen or should happen, that would be really helpful. I think you can probably add to that as well. So I just wanted to make sure it gets on the agenda for next time.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, just one other thing, and I've already talked with Ms. Bustos about this earlier this evening, but I do want to bring to our attention, just so we don't miss it for next month's meeting, on the calendar that we were given last month for the change in board meeting date for May, it says that we are meeting at 4 p.m. instead of 5 p.m. And so I was asking some questions at the end of the meeting last month about whether that's a scheduling, like reserve the room at 4 p.m. kind of thing, or just to make sure that we don't miss that, since next month is April for the following board meeting.
Vice Chair St. John, Member Galloway, yes, we actually do reserve the room from 4 on.
But the meeting would be at 5?
To ensure that there's a buffer, but the meeting will be at 5.
Okay.
Vice Chair St. John? One item for other business, I'd like to propose for a future meeting that we consider removing the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't know if there's going to be any interest in that or not, but if there is interest in it, I would like to ask our attorney to inform us whether or not we might be allowed to do so. If there's an ordinance that, I don't know why we do that. I don't know if it comes from ordinance. And so, it might not be legal to begin with, but if it's not illegal, I would be interested in having the discussion. And I understand that, there might be some people who have strong feelings on either side of the issue, but I'm interested in discussing it.
Yeah, and I ask you to also remember where we're at. We're in a city council building. This is, and so.
But that's her question. Is there
Yeah.
something that requires us to do that? There may be something that requires us to do.
I hope it's not for the sake of saving time, because it only takes a couple seconds.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Vice Chair St. John, one more thing.
Yes.
Should we include anything else that we need to vote on in the special meeting? Is there anything that we're missing that we can take care of in this next special meeting that we can put on the agenda?
I'm not aware of anything. Is anybody?
What was the question?
Is there anything
Besides
that we
the
can put on the
election?
agenda for the special meeting tentatively that we need to vote on, that we can
You're
take
saying
care
as
of
long
in
as we're having
March?
a special meeting and we're doing it for the election, is there anything else we should do?
The only other thing that we've deferred would be the use of force cases and the Garrity materials
Oh,
needing
we
to
can
be
do it then.
reviewed. If one other person could go and look at that material over the course of
Well,
the
and
next
now we
week.
have evenings open by appointment.
I will not have had time, though. I mean, it depends on when the meeting is set, but I
I know, I
haven't
need
had
to
time to look at any of this
Would it be
stuff.
That would
possible
be
just
the-
to include it on the agenda?
That would be
just in
the
case?
only other thing, yeah.
Put it on
And that's
the
what he's
agenda.
asking, is there any other business that could be done?
That's a good point. If we put it on the agenda, we can always, if we have to.
Because,
Table it again.
Well-
Yeah, I don't want to table it again.
You and I win.
don't know where everybody stands. People may have actually read the material and just
Well, I've
not
read the
read
material, I
statements.
just,
I
yeah.
think our council has a
And
comment.
those statements are only a few pages long,
They're not that long.
so.
So shall we, did we agree to put it on the agenda for the special meeting?
I'm in favor of putting it on the special agenda.
I believe the attorney would like to be recognized.
Oh, yes, yes, sir.
Yeah, this actually does not deal with putting the OIS cases on the agenda for the special meeting, but there is a ready answer to Member Larson's question. So the regularly scheduled meetings of the board and special meetings that are the result of petitions, which those have to be televised live on the government access channel. Other meetings have to be videotaped and then aired at the appropriate time, but they don't have to be broadcast live, so that may give some more flexibility as to venue.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, a motion to adjourn?
So
I move we adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.